It's Sunday, June 29, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guest today is an Associate Fellow of the Royal United Services Institute and Senior Analyst for Emerging Challenges at the NATO Defence College Foundation. He's lived in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Egypt, Israel, Oman, and Gaddafi-era Libya, as well as Trump-era Washington, D.C. He's also host of the podcast Disorder. Jason Pack, welcome to the Weekend Show.
Pleasure to be here with you.
Interesting times. We need expertise on the Middle East because, it's something that, or it's certainly an area that Americans know some of. They've heard of it. They still have the kind of hangover from the Iraq war and then the effort in Afghanistan. But things have changed recently in as much as Donald Trump, in his first 5 months in office, has decided to be the great peacemaker. Wasn't really able to do that with Ukraine. So maybe what we're seeing with Iran and Israel currently is a diversion from that. Could also be a diversion from his spending bill, his budget, but who only knows. But in the short term, we've seen Trump attack Iran, hit these nuclear facilities without going to Congress and asking for that to be sanctioned as would be normal. So obviously we've got that to deal with. We'll talk about that a bit later. But it was his response and the media's response to this attack that really has caused much of the stir in the media. Whether or not he was successful, whether or not it was necessary, whether or not he has actually set back Iran's nuclear capability, and whether or not they indeed ever had the ability to create a nuclear bomb. Let's start with that. What's your take on the last week's activities coming out of this region?
Well, the power balances in the Middle East have been more transformed in the last week than maybe any time since 9/11. And that was the moment that I quit my career in science research and thought, wow, I need to move to the Middle East. So we have something like a bookend on a period here. And whatever you think of Trump, and I tend to loathe the man and think that he has acted illegally in nearly every domain that he's ever touched, he has increased American deterrence in the region, and he's strengthened our allies, particularly our Sunni allies in the Gulf, Saudi, Qatar, the UAE. To some extent, he's helped Israel. But all those things can be possible whether or not the Iranians were trying to nuclearize and whether or not they were close to a bomb, because deterrence is about establishing that you might act, and he has definitely shown that he might act.
So are you saying that his naivety has actually been useful in this moment?
I wouldn't say it's his naivete. It's his cojones, or his thin-skinned desire to retaliate and to win. There is a role for playing poker or playing backgammon in the Middle Eastern region rather than only playing expert-driven triangulation, how many Iranian dissident groups can we work with kind of calculus. And again, I would have done it all differently, but it's critical to not merely criticize what he has done without trying to unpick its actual transformational implications for regional power dynamics.
So let's talk to the reason why he's done it in the first place, because bringing peace to the Middle East is not something that I think is really a priority for him. I think, as I see it, this is a relationship issue with Bibi Netanyahu, and that Netanyahu himself in Israel is on thin ice with his own corruption charges. And, the birds of a feather flock together. These guys have formed a friendship because they're arguably cut from the same cloth. Netanyahu has been claiming that Iran is building a nuclear weapon for 30 years. So that narrative hasn't really changed, but he has managed to convince Donald Trump of the urgency, hasn't he?
Anthony, you're right. They're both neo-populists. They're both megalomaniacs. They both face a range of legal troubles in their home countries. but they may also be transactionally geniuses. And that's why I think it's really important to call balls and strikes here. Netanyahu has been warning about the Iranian nuclear threat for 30 years, but he may have been right. And you can't discount the fact that the Iranians have always said, we'll wipe Israel off the map. He played a very delicate game with Trump and Witkoff to tease the Iranians vis-a-vis the negotiations that Witkoff, and that's Trump's Middle East envoy, had scheduled for the Sunday after the Thursday that the bombing began on June 11, June 12th in Iran. And this totally wrong-footed the Iranians. So again, like Netanyahu or like Trump or loathe them both, but they caught the Iranians off guard with a delicate good cop, bad cop routine. And that's the kind of thing that it seems unlikely that a Biden or Obama could have pulled off. I think a Blair or a Clinton had more subterfuge, but there has been an obsession on the center left, particularly in the Middle East with international law, that has weakened us relative to harming our adversaries. And you said it was Trump's naivete. I think it's his very lack of caring at all about the niceties of international law, which allow him to deliver a haymaker to America and Israel and our Sunni Gulf allies, enemies that they didn't see coming. They were blindsided by this haymaker.
I suppose another thing he has in common with Netanyahu is that they've both refused to accept any rulings or decisions by the International Criminal Court. And so, you know, maybe that's their mutual badge of honor.
I mean, I would say that they're both neo-populists. And
yeah.
I have a theory of neo-populism which lumps together Boris Johnson, Orban, Bibi, Trump as people who create problems so they can run on those problems to stay in office.
To try and fix
Trump
them, yeah.
doesn't try to fix migration. He could have built the wall during the first Trump term. He has migration as a problem that's always going to fester. So he says, you need me to stay in power to fix migration. And Netanyahu has been the same with a range of problems, not only the Palestinian issue, but the Iran nuclear issue, which is not fixed now. And Bibi will say he still needs to be in power because he's demonstrated his ability to, quote unquote, address the threat of Iran. So there's a tremendous similarity there, but it doesn't mean that they can't occasionally be transactional geniuses. And I just want to call that into being because the power dynamics of the Middle East are very different as we're speaking on Sunday, June 29th, than they were 3 weeks ago.
What do you say to the reporting that Iran was effectively tipped off by Donald Trump's social media and his appearance at the G7 where he said, you know, I need to leave a day early for something very important, but I can't tell you what it is, and that they were actually able to remove some of this uranium, if not all, from these targets in vehicles and get them out of sight so that the bombing didn't affect that?
I would say that's good. Trump wanted to telegraph it because we don't want a radioactive Chernobyl right by not just Fardao, but what about the population centers around there? You know, it's not so far from Tehran and northern Iranian population centers. So I think that Witkoff actually texted them to let them know it was coming. And there was mood music for days that like, Fardao delenda est. In other words, that the war would end once Fardao was destroyed. So of course the Iranians were tipped off, and the Iranians returned the favor. They tipped off America that they would have to do a symbolic retaliation, ergo take your military personnel out of all your Middle Eastern regional air bases. And they let the Americans know that El Udeid in northern Qatar would be attacked. And then the missiles were shot down and no one was hurt. And all I can say is, Mabruk, you know, that was very well done because for domestic reasons, each side needed their attack. And the loss of life was much, much less than it would have been otherwise.
So just explain to us why this performative military action is necessary. Because, you know, Trump's very excited about the Iron Dome in Israel and wants a similar Golden Dome for the USA, despite the fact that Israel is a very small country and we're talking about quite primitive missiles that are coming over, and to do the same thing across the US would cost billions and probably wouldn't even work at all. But there does seem to be certainly a kind of volley, a performative volley for the sake of saving face. Have I got that right?
Well, I think you have one level of it right. A lot of diplomacy is performative, Anthony, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. I expel your ambassador to show my anger that you assassinated a former Russian agent here in Salisbury in the UK. Does it actually do anything that I expelled your ambassador? No. It just signals displeasure. I lob a missile volley, but I tell you that I'm going to express my displeasure that you violated my sovereignty. That's fine. That's just how diplomacy works. I don't think that Trump has the ability or the attention span to do the follow-up, which is to convene the Jamboree Conference where Starmer and the EU and our Gulfi allies would then discuss rebuilding Iran in exchange for denuclearization and tying the Gaza issue to the Iran issue. If he would do that, he'd be a genius and he would take that transactionalism to the next level. I think that he's not likely to do that. He may engage in the performance because he likes a military parade. And he's a man who never met a missile or a tank that didn't make him feel like he doesn't have small hands, right? So he may be doing some actions for the wrong reasons, but there is something to be said for performing deterrence in a way where there isn't a Chernobyl in Iran because you let them know in advance that you were doing it. That is something that I would have to say is correct.
It's difficult for the international community, isn't it? Because Trump's kind of, playing this weird 4D chess. It's hard to know what he means because he speaks in riddles. And so we've seen, as you say, Keir Starmer kind of, pledge support and allegiance 1 minute and then Trump flip-flops and it makes Starmer and the UK look a little ridiculous. And the Europeans this last week at the NATO summit have been covering Trump in adoration and saying what a great leader he is, buttering him up, giving him a shit sandwich effectively. And
no, it's more than that. Mark Rutte did something genius when he said, sometimes daddy needs to use foul language.
Right.
Because he allowed Trump to take a victory lap at the NATO summit and to root Trump into NATO. So you mentioned that I worked for something called the NATO Defense College Foundation. I run a program there. And I'm ecstatic because by being a deceitful man who threatened to the Europeans, if you don't spend more, I won't defend you, he got the Europeans to spend more. And therefore, a lot of what that will achieve is that they can more defend themselves. And of course, the next American leader will defend Europe and will stick with NATO. And the Republicans in Congress will demand that Trump honors Article 5. So by hook or crook, we need to call balls and strikes when some things go correct. And this NATO summit was a success that I didn't see coming.
So you're saying that Trump's kind of blackmail, saying, I'll let Russia do whatever the hell they want with you unless you pay up, as mafiosa style as that sounded at the time, and as terrifying as it was for those of us who believe that Trump has an allegiance to the Kremlin, more so than an allegiance to the United States, potentially. That actually he was successful in a way that no other leader could be in that moment.
It's completely mafiosa style, but Trump got Carney elected, and that's the Prime Minister of Canada, who is a lovely man and a genius centrist on economics, who would not have been elected if Trump wasn't the mafioso loser that he is, right? So what's key here is NATO would not have spent 5%, which is necessary. NATO should have been spending, and when I say NATO, I mean the per capita GDP of each NATO country. They should have been spending more for more than a decade now. The Russian threat, not only after the annexation of Crimea, but even prior to 2014, they invaded Georgia in 2008. They've been signaling aggression. Putin is an irredentist man who wants to gobble up territory where Russian speakers live. And nonetheless, NATO countries have not spent enough or done enough to deter him. So Trump's mafiosa style stuff allowed there to be the political pressure to get many European countries to do the right thing and to stand with Poland and Estonia and to develop the capacities that allow them to help Ukraine. So all I have to say is hats off there. And I know we're getting off the topic, but some of the mistakes that Trump has done actually may benefit Middle Eastern peace.
It goes back to the naivety, I guess, the simplistic view of the world that Trump has, where everything is transactional, means that he has much less of a conscience than any other leader in his position. He's not considering the effects. He's not necessarily considering, say, if the UK is paying 5% of their GDP, that they're going to have to cut public services in order to do that. That's not something that Trump would ever consider.
If you think that Trump cares about the winter fuel allowance and whether or not Rachel Reeve can keep some British pensioners with heated houses, you've got something coming. Of course he doesn't care about that. But you might argue that diplomacy is more like poker. You try to bluff and wrong foot your opponent and get them to do things that they don't want to do, usually to your advantage, but sometimes even to their advantage. And Trump occasionally engages in tough love for allies. I do think he has a soft spot for the UK. I do think he has a soft spot for Israel. And occasionally he's able to put the screws on to get them to do things that they should do in their own interests. Again, whatever you think of Netanyahu, whether or not the preemptive strike against Iran is legal or illegal, whether it set back the nuclear program there by 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, it was a genius thing to threaten Israel. If you don't end the war, I am not going to support you. So we've got a ceasefire now that I hit Fordo. And then when he cursed and he did this and he did that, that wrapped a bow on the ceasefire. And again, all I can say is chapeau, because that achieved something that would have been very difficult for a Biden-style politician to do. Now what we need is the allies. And I'd like to see Merz and Starmer lead the charge here. And we can get into why Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, and Starmer, the PM of the UK, are uniquely positioned for this. They need to say, now we need to deal with the serious and thorny issues to end the war in Gaza, to deal with the humanitarian crisis, to begin reconstruction, and to not push for endless war and endless regime change that Netanyahu might drag us into, and that Trump, because he wants some kind of transactional win, might easily pursue if it can line his or Jared Kushner or Tiffany's husband's father, Boulos, pockets.
So is the strike on Iran by the US encouraged by Netanyahu? Is that a distraction from the Gaza conflict?
This is the dead cat question.
Is it designed to kind of to misdirect people for a moment? Because you talk to the fact that the Europeans, and I include the UK in that temporarily, need to step up to bring the focus back to Gaza and the Palestinians. But at the moment, it's all eyes on this ceasefire in Iran, which really has not a huge amount to do with what Israel is doing in Gaza. So, what is the short term versus the long term plan here? Because it sounds like the Europeans, as you describe it, have a completely different agenda to what Netanyahu has and what Trump has.
Anthony, you always ask complex, multi-layered, and brilliant questions. I want to take them in some logical steps. One, you mentioned dead catting. Dead catting is hey, look over here. The Iranian nuclear program. Don't look here in Gaza where children are starving. Of course, there's dead catting going on. But that doesn't mean that the Iranians didn't have a real nuclear program. They did. They were doing much more enrichment than was capable. They were enriching uranium to a higher degree than was possible under the JCPOA under Obama. And I genuinely think that the Iranians wanted to achieve breakout and to make a bomb and then to be in power forever. Because if you look at North Korea, it's impossible to remove the leader there, either by an internal uprising or by external intervention, because he has the bomb and he's there forever. We have in my field, and I'm a Libya expert, I lived there. I've written 2 books about it, something called the Libya model. The Libya model is that Gaddafi gave up his WMD and he gave up his anthrax program, and then the people were able to overthrow him. If you follow it to the end and you develop weapons of mass destruction as the Iranians were going to do, we would be stuck with these corrupt venal ayatollahs forever. Ergo, just because Netanyahu is dead catting, and just because he does want the war to continue so he can stay in power, doesn't mean it wasn't correct to hit the Iranian nuclear program. I'm a believer in the JCPOA. I advocated for it. I worked in not only in Obama's extended circle, but I was in DC in various think tank positions advocating for the JCPOA. But ever since Trump withdrew from that, the Iranians were getting closer and closer to breakout, and they made a strike like this pretty much necessary. So I think it's important to differentiate that there can be dead catting, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't a real threat.
The lessons learned from trying to liberate Iraq and the Americans leaving with their tails between their legs, and the same in Afghanistan, where the Taliban have effectively come back to power, don't seem to be heeded.
No, I think they are being heeded.
Well, so let's talk about the Iranian people for a moment, because what is it that the Iranian people want? We know what the Ayatollah wants, and you've explained that. But what of the Iranian people right now? Are they happy with the status quo, or because the way the American media is describing it, by killing the Ayatollah and knocking out the nuclear
no one killed the Ayatollah.
That there could be this uprising of the Iranian people. Do you really see that happening?
I think it's critical to not be reductionistic when we speak about societies very different from our own. So that's the first point.
Yeah.
The term the Arab street is very overused, and the Persian street is even more complex, right? So Iran is a country which is not majority Persian ethnically, right? You have Azeris and Baluchis, you have some Arabs, you have quite a bit of Kurds, and there is a centrifugal tendency since the Achaemenid Empire 300 years before Christ, right? And we need to deal with the fact that if the lid was blown off, the regime there, the country would likely splinter into different pieces and it would be a disaster. I think that the lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan have been learned, and that's why the circle around Trump doesn't want to do regime change. There's the MAGA kind of Vance Bannon wing who just doesn't like regime change because America first, we're not going to use the military abroad. But then there is even a kind of arch-con circle which says, well, we botched it in Iraq. We need to be traditionally conservative, and we attack our enemies, but we don't try to impose a new regime. So there is a possibility that they're doing some restraining of Netanyahu, and that's pretty important, right? Because Netanyahu has around him the Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and some very bizarre neocon elements who think that Israel can impose, whether it's the Shah or, a human rights movement in Iran. I think precisely by doing nothing, if we say the war is over and we do nothing, then there's the women's rights protesters after Mahsa Amini, a Kurdish woman, died for not wearing her hijab and the police beat her to death. There were protests for nearly a year. Those protests could restart. Then there are kind of elite factions, mostly based in LA and London, who support the Shah, who can be working with certain groups. There are terrorist organizations like Mujahideen Khalq who could be pushing in certain directions. We don't know how it's going to play out, but the key thing is it can't be a Western push. We need to let the Iranian people decide, and that's where Keir Starmer is exactly right. Now that the war is over, we can support the Iranian people, but we can't dictate to them what their regime should be.
But if they are as divided as you describe in terms of their faith and their culture, what is the likelihood of the Iranian people coming together to rise up?
I think it's critical that we don't condescend to them, Anthony.
Yeah.
The Iranian people, I think, are blessed with unbelievable human capital, great natural resources, and an unbelievably educated and successful diaspora. In the UK and the US, the Iranian communities are littered with PhDs and inventions and entrepreneurship. And back in Tehran, particularly in North Tehran, you have a blossoming bourgeoisie and educated grouping who may be able to make cross-cutting political allegiances. Again, that's not for us to decide. I am anything other than a neocon. I just don't think that we in the West, with our record of failures of interventionism and regime change operations, can be telling the Iranian people what to do or not do. We can support some democracy activists. We can help with reconstruction. But I don't think the Ayatollahs are long for this earth, right? And that's why it was correct of Netanyahu and Trump to not kill Khamenei. If they had killed him, they'd make him a martyr. And we can get into Shi'i theology if you're interested. That's something actually I did a lot of graduate work on. But to not make a martyr out of our opponents allows the Iranian people to decide. They killed nuclear scientists and IRGC commanders because they either had blood on their hands or wanted to have blood on their hands. And that's great. But let the Iranian people deal with the next step.
The Ayatollah has made his first statement since the attacks. On Thursday, he said his country had delivered a slap to America's face by striking a U.S. airbase in Qatar, and warned against further attacks in his first public comments since the ceasefire agreement. Donald Trump was very keen to present the ceasefire as forever. When he was asked, how long do you think this is going to hold? He goes, forever. We're back to the naivety again here. I mean, with this conflict that has been going on for decades, what are the chances of it holding this time? There have been plenty of ceasefires brokered in previous years with previous administrations.
I'm sorry, I have to correct you there.
Yeah.
Because there hasn't been a direct Iranian-Israel war, there has never prior been a ceasefire.
Okay, so what you're saying is that this is as historic as Trump is describing?
It's unbelievably historic. I don't think that means that the ceasefire will hold because, of course, the Israelis said we already have a target list that we plan to hit if they're nuclearizing and if we catch the uranium here and if we catch these scientists. The Israelis also want to take out more ballistic missile launchers. I want to differentiate American war aims and Israeli war aims. American war aims are denuclearization, right? Getting the centrifuges, getting the scientists, attacking the underground labs. The Israelis are much more concerned with the ballistic missile program, missile launchers, missile building sites, and drones. The Ukrainians are particularly concerned with drone building because the plurality of drones that Russia uses on the front lines in Donbass are made in Iran. So you just have different parties here with different aims. That said, the ceasefire is a genius tactic, but it will not hold if there's no political process. I like the analogy of a marriage here, Anthony. Let's say that I have problems with my wife and she and I really disagree about what school our kids should go to, or we disagree about my spending habits. We go to the marriage counselor and the marriage counselor says, go on a great romantic date, buy each other amazing presents and have sex. Great. You enjoy the date. It might last, but if you haven't dealt with the underlying problems, you're going to have a fight about the kids' school and my spending habits. So Trump's solution is like, here's $1 billion, have a great date. He hasn't dealt with the Iranian nuclear program, Iran's proxies in the region, Israeli oppression in not only Gaza, but the West Bank and settlements. I mean, the fundamental causes, he didn't even address those. So I think that's why this needs to be internationalized. And precisely Trump's volatile nature has allowed for an ability to maybe get our Gulfi allies and the Europeans and other stakeholders to be like, wow, we've got to take this away from Trump and have this Jamboree conference. The Europeans have frequently let me down, so I expect that they will let me down again. But it doesn't mean that it isn't our role as journalists and commentators and experts to call out that, wow, there really is a different power calculus now. Iranian proxies are so weak. Hezbollah, it's on its knees. The Houthis are not even really able to block Red Sea shipping as they were previously. So there's an opportunity to remake the region in an even more profound way than it has been heretofore.
It's very interesting. I feel that your position is refreshing because, it's very clear to me that Trump is not one for detail. But what you're saying is that in that process, he's actually gone above and beyond by nature of his lack of attention. And it just means that you need to have diplomats, you need to have negotiators, you need to have people with expertise of the culture and of the region to follow up and to follow through. Because, the people that Trump has been sending in are they're kind of low-grade business people. They're not really experts. And as you also say, quite rightly, if we don't understand the culture, this was the problem in Iraq, I guess. If we don't understand the culture of the nation that you are seeking to either regime change or bring democracy to or to liberate in some way, then the chances are you're going to fail.
100%. But I think you hit at something deeper. There is a level where poker players are useful and experts who know perfect Farsi and Southern Iraqi Arabic, they're not going to be great on that level. But then there's another level where you need regional experts who understand the Israeli economy and the intercompatibility with the Emirati and Saudi economy. And they don't necessarily need to know Arabic and Hebrew, but then you need other people who know whatever. So we need to have all of these skills to be brought to bear. And I'm not going to say that I know it all, but I do know that Europe and the UK have certain core equities, and they have a different ability to do stuff that we can't do in the States. Like, very simply put, the reason why it was impossible to get the Oslo Accords and then Camp David and stuff over the line is America is too much Israel's lawyer and not a neutral broker between the sides. I mean, Dennis Ross and Aaron David Miller have said as much themselves, right? If there was a counterbalance between America doing some things and Witkoff doing some things, but then the Europeans, particularly those European nations who have a greater affinity to the Palestinian cause, if they play another role, now we're talking. That's like real mediation, and we could begin to get stuff done.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about why American Republicans are going to see themselves as the leading defenders of Israel and what's really in that. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I'm excited to share with you C15 from Fatty 15, the first emerging essential fatty acid to be discovered in more than 90 years. It's an incredible scientific breakthrough to support our long-term health and wellness, and you guessed it, healthy aging. Fatty 15 co-founder Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson discovered the benefits of C15 while working with the US Navy. Based on over 100 studies, we now know that C15 strengthens our cells and is a key healthy aging nutrient, which helps to slow biological aging at the cellular level. In fact, when our cells don't have enough C15, they become fragile and age faster. And when our cells age, our bodies age too. This eventually led to studies finding the first new nutritional deficiency in 75 years, called cellular fragility syndrome, caused by a lack of C15. As many as 1 in 3 people worldwide have low C15 levels and cellular fragility syndrome. By replenishing our cells with the crucial C15 nutrient, Fatty 15 effectively repairs cells, reverses aging at the cellular level, and restores our long-term health and wellness. Fatty 15 is on a mission to optimize your C15 levels to help support your long-term health and wellness, especially as you age. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/weekend and using code WEEKEND at checkout. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on the Weekend Show with Jason Pack. I'm Anthony Davis. Senator Ted Cruz offered some controversial answers to some questions when interviewed by Tucker Carlson, declaring himself the leading defender of Israel in the U.S. Senate. And he also explained that the number one reason for that is that as a Christian growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And he said, from my perspective, I want to be on the blessing side of things. This is a bit of a theme with this kind of Christian nationalist movement in the US. Let's just talk to this for a moment, because obviously the US and the UK were there at in the creation of Israel in 1947, and so there is a natural allegiance to
the British
Israel
kind of
as a
opposed it, but yeah, we can get there in a second.
Right. Okay. So the natural allegiance is partly, I guess, because the nation was formed by these countries, and so these allegiances were formed, and the nation of Israel was therefore formed, and so. It turns out now that obviously with someone like Netanyahu at the head, there is some confusion as to, well, who do you support? Do you support Israel, or do you support Netanyahu? Are they mutually exclusive?
Again, very multi-layered question. I want to back up and say I want to back up and point out it's rather hysterical to say Ted Cruz's quote with a straight face, because it's so absurd. But yet it's critical to point out that Christian Zionism is an umbrella catch-all term that applies to evangelicals, Pentecostals, some Catholics, although less, and genuinely they believe whatever Israel is doing, they support it because of the idea that A, it will bring about the end times. If all the Jews are ingathered to Israel, then the end times can come and the Messiah, Jesus, can have his second coming. And B, as you point out, maybe in the afterlife, they will benefit if they have helped Israel, right? So we can't just make fun of it because it motivates millions and millions of people to make decisions. And I would argue that Christian Zionism is a much more important force in the U.S. electorally than Jewish Zionism. So that's a controversial view, but the books that I've read and the think tank reports do tend to reinforce this view.
Well, just from the numbers perspective, surely, I mean, there's a whole lot more Christian Zionists than there are Jewish Zionists.
Correct. And then the critical point here is to extrapolate out and realize that Israel has become a culture war issue. One of the things that has happened with many issues in our lives, whether it's migration or trans or gay marriage or even abortion, is that the issues have no longer been debated on their actual merits. What does it mean, for example, if we restrict this kind of abortion, that how does this affect things demographically, blah, blah, blah. It's just become a culture war issue. Oh, we oppose it. Oh, we support it. And therefore, Ted Cruz has tapped into something. He is waging a culture war, and Israel, its support is about getting votes and staking a claim and planting a flag. And that's the way that a lot of the Fox News viewing things. Our side won. They bombed this. They did that, right? Rather than the nuances of, What would it look like to have a region which is secure for Jews to live within the Green Line? What would it be like to have a region where there isn't so much anti-Semitism taught in, the Arab school curriculum? They're not asking those nuanced questions.
And at the same time, Ted Cruz is also completely wrong about the Bible verse too. I think that the passage is from Genesis 12, 1-3, in which God says to Abraham, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse, and by you all the families of earth shall bless themselves." I mean, the passage doesn't reference the government of Israel nor the nation of Israel.
There is no Israel at this time.
Right.
There are no Jews at that time. Abraham is sitting in Ur of the Chaldees
right.
and is being told, hey, don't be an idol worshiper. Go and I'm going to take care of you. It has nothing to do with even subsequent generations. Of course, the man doesn't know his Bible.
But does that mean that this entire movement of Christian Zionism is built on a bit of a fabrication?
No, I don't think that's right. There are other passages in the Bible and in the New Testament, if we look at Revelations and other things, where there is a spiritual role for the people Israel in their native land, Israel, and that has eschatological implications, right? And you talked about the role of Britain. Before World War I, if we look at David Lloyd George and Asquith and other Christian Zionists, they have an understanding that it would be good from a British Christian Protestant perspective if the Jews could be restored to territoriality in the Holy Land. But by the 1930s, already Britain doesn't love the idea because their Arab allies, particularly in the Gulf, are against it. And therefore, we're going to make the white paper and prevent Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Europe from coming into Palestine. And obviously the British government has a lot to answer for because hundreds of thousands of Jews on boats were turned away, who then met their death in death camps, right? So Britain doesn't have the ability to say that they were helpful to Israel or the Jewish people in that time. But that has to do with the politics of the moment and the Bible and their interplay, right? And that's always been going on. This is a place, when you're in Jerusalem, all of monotheism has its holy sites there. So Christians and Muslims and Jews and every kind and flavor from Pentecostal to Armenian to whatever, they want to have their claim on this. It's a shame that that makes it more difficult to solve politically because everyone thinks that they're an expert and everyone has an identity hook into the problem.
So the policy of the Europeans, certainly the British, and under Joe Biden's administration was a two-state solution for Israel. And that now seems to have been brushed under the carpet or possibly withdrawn completely with
I don't think that's
Trump
fair.
In charge.
I'm not sure that the two-state solution is brushed under the carpet. Obviously, it's what European leaders reiterate whenever asked about the question. It is what centrist think tankers from DC to Brussels to Westminster write papers about. Unfortunately, Netanyahu doesn't believe in it, so it's impossible to bring about. And there is no coherent Palestinian leadership, right? Mahmoud Abbas is in his 80s. The Palestinian Authority has no legitimacy. Hamas hasn't been dislodged from Gaza. So there's no one to negotiate with, neither on the Palestinian or the Israeli side. It doesn't mean that the two-state solution is dead. And I think it is critical to point out that some kind of version of what Clinton worked on at Camp David is still a possible solution. And I think those of us who care about this issue and who are coming at it from a center-left humanitarian, both people should have the right to have their states and to have self-determination and safety in their region, are going to gravitate to something that looks like this solution.
But with the likes of Netanyahu and Donald Trump and their bromance kind of holding things together, it does put that plan on ice, doesn't it?
But don't just blame them. Blame also the Hamas terrorists and Yahya Sinwar, who made a horrific massacre on October 7th, which we haven't heretofore mentioned. And the others who are preparing in the West Bank and in Gaza, other massacres, and Hezbollah and the Houthis who, unprovoked and unattacked on October 8th, began lobbing missiles and rockets at Israel, right? So there is a thing that's been going on the left since October 8th. And I was obviously shocked and horrified by the election of Mamdani because he has shown, and I'm from Manhattan, right? He's shown that he does not get what's going on in the Middle East based on his tweets. And I'm happy for him to be mayor of New York, but please shut up. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
Okay, well, let's talk to him for a moment because seeing as you mentioned his name, this is a 33-year-old former rapper who has garnered an awful lot of support to the point that he's won himself the Democratic primary in New York with quite a significant win, 43 to 36% or something like that, Andrew Cuomo behind him. The problem here, though, is that the Democrats need an individual such as him in this moment, don't they? They need somebody who is seen as the resistance, as a rebel who has got the...
I'm not sure about that.
Well, there is a power vacuum. There is a leadership shortage at the moment, and a lot of Americans and certainly New Yorkers are seeing an awful lot of hope in this individual. What you're saying is that maybe he should stay out of Middle Eastern politics. The problem, though, Jason, is that because he's a Muslim, the American media are asking him questions about things with which he doesn't really know, and they're not asking the same questions of the other candidates in that race. They're asking him because he's a Muslim, and therefore they're trying to put him on the spot.
That's probably true. And I listened to your episode about his victory in the primary. I just think that his tweets on October 8th are inexcusable. And for me, as someone who grew up in Manhattan, even though I would be on the left of the electorate there and I would favor some of his policies over those of Cuomo's, that's a bridge too far. There are some things in political life that if you say them, you're ineligible, in my mind, to hold office. And anyone who thinks that Hezbollah and the Houthis had a right to attack Israel on October 8th before any war or anything in Gaza had begun, i.e. right after the massacres of October 7th, when people were still bleeding in hospitals, I'm sorry, I can't accept that. And I think that it is important for those of us who want to just call a spade to point out that he did say things that are not just the resistance. You could easily say that's what anti-Semitism is. We go further afield from talking about issues in the Middle East, but unfortunately, Mamdani's election, to me, shows that anti-Semitism has been mainstreamed in the left of the Democratic Party, and even the Jewish electorate of Manhattan feels that it has to turn a blind eye to it because it's become so mainstream.
Arguably, though, Donald Trump is the most anti-Semitic president America has ever had and has employed a host of extreme anti-Semites in his cabinet and to have around him as advisors. And, this is the hypocrisy of this debate, is that Trump right now is using anti-Semitism as an excuse to deport people.
Oh, it's disgusting.
Or to turn people away at the airport because someone's written or contributed to a paper in a university decades ago. It's so nuanced, this conversation, isn't it? Anti-Semitism can mean a whole host of things.
No, but I think you know an anti-Semite when you see one, and Trump is one.
Yeah.
Because he has made comments his whole career. Oh, I love having Jews as my lawyers. They make good accountants, money people, and lawyers. He doesn't even feel a need to hide the fact that he considers Jews a category who are good at certain things. Do you know what I mean? It's
Sure.
like classical. And we're not even mentioning Charlottesville. Oh, there were good people on both sides, right? Do you know what I mean? Good people on both sides, meaning the KKK side had good people. But again, we're getting farther afield here. No one disputes that Trump is an anti-Semite, but he loves the fact that he's going to be able to crack down on the universities that he hates. And then he'll get the Jews blamed for that. It's a genius move.
His language, though, surrounding Gaza and the Palestinians and the idea of shipping them to Jordan and Egypt
and Libya.
And Libya, indeed. And having ethnically cleansing the region effectively. I mean, he wasn't joking. He even put out on social media a kind of AI commercial of a Trump Riviera. What did you make of that?
It's difficult to tell what's a joke and what's reality because Trump jokes about things which are so heinous. He may mean the thing and mean the joke. Do you know what I mean? He operates in a multi-layered way, Anthony. If he could snap his fingers, I do think he would ethnically cleanse Gaza. It's tragic. It's quasi-fascistic, but he would. Sadly, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are ministers in the Israeli cabinet, they probably would do the same. So he has allies who are willing to do ethnic cleansing and violate international law, right? And we are calling a spade by saying that. It isn't conjecture because they've told us so, right? That said, it might be that is the opening salvo of a threat which allows a negotiation with Gulfi allies to get them to pony up the hundreds of billions to rebuild Gaza and create scholarship programs and deal with making Gaza a better place. I mean, in other words, people who have evil in their heart occasionally end up doing some things that are good. And I don't think that he is competent enough even to pull off some of the fascistic things that he says. In other words, the man is not a Mussolini or a Hitler. Those were evil geniuses. Trump is Trump. He wouldn't know how to begin an ethnic cleansing.
Well, arguably, he's already started it on the streets of America, grabbing.
No, it's not systematic.
Not yet, but remember, with Hitler, it took a decade or so to really kind of get to the point that he was looking for. I feel with Donald Trump, he sees Israelis as white, Palestinians as brown, and to him,
I think that's the language of the left. I'm not sure that he sees it in those terms. I think he sees the Israelis as ones who his voting coalition likes and will help him stay in power. I don't think he actually cares about these kind of colonial, neo-colonial white. But he
is a racist at heart, and so the racism that we're seeing on the streets of the United States and at the airports, the kidnappings, the disappearings, the snatching, masked men. This is the stuff of Nazi Germany, and it's actually happening.
Again, but it's not systematic enough. I need to push back against this use of Nazi.
Give him a few more weeks, Jason. I mean, it's early days. But
if you think that Stephen Miller is able to kind of bring about some kind of final solution of the illegal migration problem, you've really overestimated Stephen Miller. These guys are two-bit neo-populists. They're going to change their mind. I want a 90% tariff. I want a 40% tariff. I want a tariff and then I want 90 days of a pause. Oh, but bring the tariff back. There's no system here, Anthony. And we need to call a spade on this. They're incompetent in the very neo-populism that they claim to be doing.
But they can only be prevented from seeing this through if we have a court system that holds up. We have a Supreme Court system that holds up. And currently, the judiciary and the Supreme Court are very much in the pocket of Donald Trump. And there was a ruling on Friday that effectively gives Trump the opportunity to do whatever he wants, even with regard to birthright citizenship.
I know.
So things are definitely
it's horrible,
changing.
And the Democrats haven't stood up enough.
Right.
And it's not only that they haven't stood up enough. We need in the U.S. what happens in every parliamentary country, which is a leader of the opposition. As soon as you're not in power, there is one figure who is the leader of the opposition. And that person can coalesce their agenda, their shadow cabinet. And it's true, the U.S. doesn't have a parliamentary system.
Yeah.
But whether it would be Adam Schiff or Pete Buttigieg, someone to say, this is unconstitutional, I would do this, I oppose these deportations, and to point out, This is two-bit neopopulism. It's not only that it's unconstitutional, it's incompetent. Why the Dems haven't done that, I have no idea.
Well, because we're not into an election cycle yet, I guess. And that, unfortunately, is part of the problem with the electoral system in the US. And I've advocated for more of a parliamentary system, even in name only. I mean, they did it briefly by doing some shadow hearings, which I thought was a really good idea.
Excellent.
But the idea of having a shadow cabinet and shadow leadership, I think, can happen by osmosis. You don't need an act of Congress to do that. And it would be nice if somebody did, but unfortunately we have the old guard, Chuck Schumer, and even Hakeem Jeffries to a certain extent, and big money in politics, ultimately. And that's been the problem with the
I know, but I feel
Democratic
like Trump
National
is so incompetent, he will cause the very resistance to come into being through sheer incompetence. And again, I know we're supposed to be talking about the Middle East, but I see the man as so incompetent that he will tank the economy and he will cause Gavin Newsom to be a shadow leader on ICE and immigration issues. And he will cause, whether it's Pete Buttigieg or someone else, to be it on transport or someone on foreign policy. That it hasn't happened yet is embarrassing, and the Dems embarrass me. And it's one of the reasons that I moved to the UK, right? I used to advise Biden and Jake Sullivan on Middle Eastern policies, but I opted with my feet and I got my UK global talent visa because Jake Sullivan was too thick to take advice properly. And I'm sorry, Jake, you are a brilliant man, but you just never allowed input into the process, right? So it was better for me to be here, quote unquote, in the resistance, because you need a government in exile sitting here in Hampstead and burrowing underneath the hills so that at least when the nuclear goes off, we're going to be safe here in London.
It is very worrying that people such as yourself are having to make these geographical decisions. Again, there's other parallels with the early 30s, with people getting out of Europe because they knew what was coming. And we've been given enough warnings now, and I know we disagree a little bit about how far the far right is moving in the US.
No, we don't disagree. It's moving very far right.
But a lot has happened. I mean, if it took Hitler a decade, it's taken Trump 6 months to go from nothing to this. And people are very scared right now.
I'm as scared as you, and maybe more scared, because I'm seeking my UK citizenship, right? I bought a house here. I'm on an enemies list, right? And that's just a known thing about me. When I resigned my position in DC in 2018, I called out certain kinds of corruption that were happening, okay? So I'm on an enemies list. I just think that their danger is slightly different. Fascism is more about order. What Trump is putting forth is disorder. I host something called the Disorder Podcast. I believe that their threat is to deliberately pull the whole world into what I call the enduring disorder. And the enduring disorder is going to be evil and bad and horrible for human rights, but it's not going to exactly be ordered fascism with Auschwitz and round them up camps and then hand this off to the tech bro oligarchs. It's going to be far more disorderly than that. It's going to be a catch as catch can kind of system. And that doesn't make it less scary. Of course we need to resist. I want to live in a world where there is a rule of law and wealthy billionaires pay more tax than their secretaries.
The Warren Buffett rule, but that's not happening in the US anytime soon. And I would draw your attention, I'm sure you know, but the data company Palantir that was started by Peter Thiel now has this new role working with the DHS where they are effectively cross-pollinating people's data, taking their social security information and their employment and their health and everything and bringing it into one place, and even the photograph, so that these henchmen, these ICE agents, federal agents or bounty hunters, whatever you choose to call them, they can now go up to people and with their phones they can identify them, and all of this information is cross-referenced in a moment, and they can see whether they need to be kidnapped and deported. I mean, if this isn't the stuff of the secret police, I don't know what is.
Well, there is a little bit of a China model going on, the social credit score. And what was pioneered in the UAE in terms of facial recognition technology and using the state to crack down in a hyper techno spying way is coming to the US. And it's one of the reasons that I've opted out, right? I'm very, very worried. And I do think that our liberal democracy and our civil rights, which is our rights as an individual to speak up and to be, free in our own homes and to have First Amendment protections, that's all under threat. Of course, that's under threat. I'm just slightly disagreeing about the question of what it is that they're trying to achieve. To me, fascism is a system, Anthony, where there is an ideology. There's an economic system. There may be some ideas about race or about national purity, and then policies which are taken to get there. I don't think that what we have in the White House has a coherent ideology. The enduring disorder that I talk about on my Disorder podcast is he doesn't have a view about climate change or AI regulation, which are the great issues of our day, or about the Middle East. He's going to say one thing and then do the opposite and then say the opposite and take the tariffs off, merely to continue the problems so that people are afraid and that he can grift and make sure that his son-in-law makes billions of dollars.
But is it a fair comparison? Because I agree with you that the tariffs is a whole flip-flop thing, but that's because Project 2025 is for free trade. They, that group who are the Heritage Foundation and that group who are operating inside the White House through their surrogates, Russell Vogt and those people, they're for free trade. Trump has been for tariffs for 30 years. That's something that comes from him. But the thing that does connect them, and certainly from Stephen Miller as a far-right nationalist, white supremacist, is this stuff of eugenics and the great replacement theory.
Yeah.
And the idea that actually, and to quote Stephen Miller, America is for Americans and Americans only. They are trying to make America white again. And I think that is the thing that binds them all together.
But I don't think they
Trump.
really believe that it's possible. I think this is a critical difference. Stephen Miller is not going to round up non-whites and take them to gas chambers. It's not only that he's Jewish. I think that Stephen Miller, if you look at his little wry smile, knows it's all a fucking joke just to stay in power.
But the equivalent of the gas chamber, without wanting to diminish history, is taking somebody to a El Salvadorian gulag who has never been to El Salvador. And locking them away with no due process, with no court hearing. I mean, Trump has said out loud, I can't give everybody court hearings. I mean, how is that even possible? Completely misunderstanding the point of the Constitution and the rights. Of course,
the man doesn't understand due process. Again, I want to clarify my point here. I think that the danger is as imminent as you do.
Yeah.
I merely think that labeling it and diagnosing it help us resist. For me, the danger is the enduring disorder, not fascism. And if we understand it's the enduring disorder, we in the center, left, and left can organize around order. And order means to have a vision of what peace in the Middle East looks like, a vision of what free trade with our allies and a relationship with Canada and Mexico. Do you know what I mean? Rather than merely opposing that they're trying to do a putsch to, undo our democracy. That may be happening, but the fundamental threat of the disorder is the thing that we have allowed to creep up, and we didn't probably address enough in the Trump 1 term.
You're obviously a little more cautious. My view is that if you pile it on, then it will cause more of a pingback from the resistance, that the resistance is more likely to organize if they see that the threat is far more serious than it is in this moment. The
enduring disorder is a very serious threat.
Right. But I'm just looking at the trajectory of this kind of neo-Nazi behavior from the White House. And the graph is in this direction. It is growing day by day, and the courts are increasingly supporting Trump's desire to segregate people. And then, of course, we have the midterms coming up, and, whilst Trump uses these loose terms to claim there is an act of war, whether it's the Venezuelans attacking the US, as an excuse to be able to put the military on the streets, or indeed to attack Iran and claim there is a threat there. This type of thing will continue, even to the point that he could suspend elections.
It's a terrifying thought, but you're right. We need to consider that possibility. I want to reference Bill Maher here. Bill Maher said as early as 2016, he'll say the elections are rigged. And if he wins, he'll accept. And if he doesn't, he'll protest.
Yeah.
Then in 2020, he said he'll say the elections are rigged and he'll try to take over the government if he loses. But if he wins, he'll stay in power. And that's exactly what he did in 2020. And it's what he did in 2024. He said that they were rigged. And if he was going to lose, he was going to do what every tin pot African dictator does, is say, oh, they're rigged, I'm staying, you know? So we need to be prepared. I think we are prepared for that. I would like to see the ability of our allies, though, to use this unique historical moment to achieve certain things that were not achievable previously, right? And the Europeans can get on the page. Obviously, Brexit makes that more difficult. And the Polish presidential election, where an opponent to Donald Tusk came into power. So there's a lot of complexities going on here, but doesn't mean that the Europeans can't get on the same page. Doesn't mean that they can't work to try to end the war in Gaza and work with our allies and get the hostages back, because there is a vacuum on the international diplomatic scene. America is no longer the global leader, right? And America from World War II until about 20 minutes ago was the one that had the heft, had the convening power and the long-term focus to do stuff. Now America is, absent at the wheel. I just would like to focus on what Europeans and our Gulfy allies can do that can actually help the world.
We have to finish in a second, but I just wanted to say it was remarkable to see Mark Carney get ahead of the G7 and get up there and talk about this new alliance between Canada and Europe, the European Union, with no mention of the United States, that they have realized how serious this is. They have realized that Trump, his allegiances lie with our former adversaries, and that now there needs to be a new global positioning for geopolitics, whereby the alliances are such that it's the goodies versus the baddies. It's the rebel alliance versus the empire.
I call it orderers versus disorderers on my Disorder podcast. Carney is a mega orderer. He has something that even the European leaders don't have, which is that he understands that he needs to build coalitions. And that coalition can be with the EU, it can be with Starmer, it can be with the Australians. And even though Canada may not look like a superpower, it is in every institution from NATO to the UN to the IMF to whatever. It has the English language, and Carney can be the mega orderer and can achieve stuff on climate change, on AI regulation. So I would just vote him to be mega orderer in chief.
Right.
And really, he should just go with it and propose, free trade blocks. And here's how we're going to regulate AI. I just think that he is going to be brilliant.
I agree. It's so interesting to see how things have changed so very quickly in just a few weeks. That's politics, I guess. And we have to finish. Go ahead.
The thing is, Carney needs to shame a lot of the Democratic leaders in Europe to grow a pair. Right. Because I had high hopes for Keir Starmer here in the UK, that he would stride the globe like a colossus with his 70 to 80 seat majority. And that means you've won by a lot in the Westminster system. And he would propose things and host conferences, but he's been as timid as a mouse. And hopefully Carney can push Merz and Starmer and others to actually grow a pair and lead. Because if you don't, Trump is just going to demolish and pick them off one by one if they don't get together.
I would agree with that. And I think that the moment Carney's had a range of jobs. He's an economist, former governor of the Bank of England. He did a pretty good job of that. But in this moment, he really shows that ability to lead, which is rare, is very much part of his DNA. Okay, for now, Jason Pack, thanks for joining the Weekend Show.
Been a great pleasure. We've ordered the disorder together.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.